I really appreciate the opportunity to be presenting to all of you today. And I want to start everything off with a story. So think about the picture you see in front of you. You're in the capital city of Iceland, and it's December of 2012. It's one of the biggest events of the year. You're coming out and you're really trying to get an idea of what's been going on for the past few years. You've just been through one of the worst crises in your entire economy's history. Your country has gone through the worst banking crisis. In fact, through the 2008 recession, more than 50% of your economy was made up from banking, and it was utterly destroyed because of all of the bad mortgage notes that they lent out to other neighbors in Europe. And what has actually happened is because of the resurgence of all of that new ideas of how we can bring back our economy, there has been kind of a look into the country of how can we not just look at improving our economy, but how can we improve our entire ecosystem. And the big thing that is actually coming up is the major elections. And what they decided is that they want to change the entire Constitution. The Constitution was actually created based off of Denmark's Constitution in the 30s. And what the community of Iceland thought is that because of what has happened, we want to restart everything. And this really puts into historical context the importance of crowdsourcing. And what they decided to do was crowdsource their entire constitution. So they literally put it out on Facebook and other social media for all the citizens of Iceland to decide what is important to them, what should be the basis of the Constitution. And believe it or not, even in an election cycle, it was enacted. And the first crowdsourced constitution ever in the history of the world has been passed in early December. And now Iceland was ready for its new start. So what am I here to talk to you guys about today? And for those of you who have no clue what crowdsourcing is, we're going to start simply with talking about what is crowdsourcing, some grand examples of how it's been used in history outside of the Icelandic example, business applications of it, and some techniques and resources that you can use. And then we're going to get into the meat of the presentation to handle the original question of how can you finish your projects on time and leverage this secret internet community. And we're going to cover what it means to do project management and make it on time, key considerations leveraging crowdsourcing, and possible caveats that you might come about when you're doing this process. Breaking right into it with about crowdsourcing. So those of you who are unfamiliar with the idea, crowdsourcing has been really popularized in the last 5 years, really starting in 2006 with the creation of a lot of different companies that support this entire ecosystem. But how we're going to define it for the sake of this presentation is essentially a method of obtaining services, ideas, or content from a large distributed group of contributors. So that means that people will be getting business value out of a large group of contributors, whether it's all happening simultaneously or you use the group of contributors to pick out the person who's ultimately going to be doing the work. And this will become more clear as we go through some examples in the presentation. So you're probably wondering, like, where the heck did this crowdsourcing come from and why is it such a big deal? And actually, the origins of crowdsourcing are much before 2006 and professional crowdsourcing companies came about online. Actually started out in early French history when the French government decided that they wanted to create prizes for citizens that come up with great innovative ideas. And actually, two of the biggest inventions that came out of this prize was the first airtight jar. So anyone who eats canned food might be a good fan of this. and the first water turbine, which actually led to the invention of the submarine. So thanks to early crowdsourcing by the French, we have our submarines, our jars, and some other cool instruments that came out of that. Some other times you might be have heard of this is actually Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? It was popularized in the late 90s, the concept of ask the audience, and a lot of people got the idea that if we just ask the audience, we can get the right answer, and over 80% of the time on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the audience actually helped the contestants to make the correct answer. So this is a kind of more recent popularization of crowdsourcing. And for those of you in the IT and software industry, open source software is probably the most business value that has been created. WordPress for websites, Linux for operating systems, and Mozilla Firefox for web browsers was all a result of crowdsourcing, where you actually had tons of contributors working on the code all together to produce this great open source product. So how has this actually been leveraged for companies in the recent modern times to create large business value and for their projects to solve their problems? 4 great examples of this is Netflix, who put out an algorithm that they said, here's our public algorithm of how we select movies. And what they decided to do was find out how they could improve the effectiveness of the algorithm. So if someone likes a movie and Netflix recommends the movie, then that would be a good match. Or if someone doesn't like the movie and Netflix removes it from the recommendations, that would also be a good match. And they were actually able to put it out for $1 million challenge, have universities and companies all around the world work on this, and come up with a 10% improvement on the algorithm. And there's actually a little bit of a challenge with that, because one was close to like 10% and the other one was only far off, but they ended up selecting one winner that really improved their core algorithm that runs their business. Another kind of derivative of this grand challenge concept is the idea of the X Prize. And the first kind of major X Prize that was created was the challenge to get a space vehicle into suborbital flight. And another popular one was the 100 mile per gallon challenge, to build a vehicle that could travel at 100 miles per gallon or better. And another more recent one was the $10,000 genome challenge, where essentially the challenge was to index the entire genome for, I think they wanted to do 100 genes of the genome in 10 days for $100,000 or $10,000 or less. And all of those really led to major significant improvements by the companies that did them. Like the suborbital spaceflight launched a number of space companies that are now delivering payloads for NASA. So that's been huge success. All of you are probably familiar with Wikipedia, but the big thing about Wikipedia is if you think back in the late 90s to how encyclopedias were created, a lot of people that ran encyclopedias that had heard of Wikipedia said that this will never work and guest contributors will never be able to provide better quality to encyclopedias. And actually recent studies have shown that Wikipedia is actually more accurate than even Encyclopedia Britannica, and it's really shaken up the model of encyclopedias. And recently, a couple of encyclopedias, like the one that's owned by Microsoft, has announced that they're no longer going to have the physical books and it's only going to be online. And another kind of cool challenge is the one by SETI, which is the Search for